Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspires our conversation. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're at the intersection. Fascinating thing about intersections, we all go through many intersections a day, and the way we navigate them determines the trajectory of our lives. Great topic today, Terry. We're going to talk about something that is, I think, a lot of times poorly understood: reciprocity.
I can tell you that up until yesterday, I viewed it a different way. We were taking our creativity personal mastery course yesterday, and our instructor, Dr. Rao, mentioned how he views it and what it actually is. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, I never viewed reciprocity. And from that perspective, I always saw it as some kind of obligation that if someone did something for me, I was obligated to do it back. But given his definition, it's a little bit, or his view of it, it's a little bit different.
The broad perspective of it is different. I think a lot of times what we see and what we have interpreted over the course of our lives is a transactional form of reciprocity, right? Mm-hmm. One hand washes the other, or somebody does something to help you. There's a reciprocal obligation. Certainly, we know like it's used powerfully in sales, obviously.
Yeah,
it's a huge tool of influence, and you see it. I mean, you see it multiple times a day, and even companies try to do it. They try to, basically give you a gift in exchange for you doing, business with them.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing is, it's like the intersections, right? We all run into them. We all run into situations of reciprocity throughout the day, right? Every day of our life. And I'm quite sure that how I viewed it, the majority of the people that I know probably viewed it the same way. It was novel, and probably maybe even an aha moment as to how he described it yesterday. He says, hey, the reciprocity doesn't rest with the person, it rests with the universe, which is kind of mind blowing, right? When we think about maybe deeds we've done for others, right? Or deeds that others have done for us, and we feel an obligation to kind of reciprocate that, that by saying, hey, that person right there did something nice for me. I really need to do something nice for them. We might not think about it from a reciprocity perspective, but we have that feeling that we want to do something nice for somebody that's done something nice for us. But it is reciprocity. And he says, hey, you shouldn't have that feeling. That rests with the universe. The universe will take care of that person. So we shouldn't expect that, as you used the word earlier, it shouldn't be a transactional kind of thing. And so made me believe or think, well, is it relationship-based? Well, I guess it is, but it's the relationship that you have with the universe.
It's fascinating. I mean, you peel it back and peel it back and peel it back, many, many layers, to get at the whatever the core reality you want to attach to it. Mm-hmm. I kind of was struck by the notion that it as you do whatever you do, you do it because you believe it's right. It's related to concepts that he's talked about before around, humans are basically incapable of acting outside their self-interest, even if it's altruistic. And there's a whole long thing about that. But the idea that I picked up from it is that I shouldn't expect reciprocity from individuals, right? I'm just acting in a certain way, knowing that it'll all work out right in the end. It may not specifically be what I expected or what I wanted, so why not just suspend all expectations, just do the thing, and let the chips fall.
Yeah. And that means if you just do the thing and let the chips fall, then that means there's no agenda, right? And we know, as you just said, it's impossible for people to do anything outside of what's in their best interest, which means there's an agenda, right? There's an expectation, which we talked about yesterday as well. The expectation, and he's saying there's no expectations. You just do the thing with no expectations, and the universal reward you or whatever, but you shouldn't expect the reward. But it'll happen. It might not happen when you want it within a particular time, but somehow it'll happen. And you know, as a human being, we're always trying to find the evidence, right, of something happening as to why. Because I have this statement that anything that I've ever done, and I'm gonna put a label on it, good or bad, I know when something happens for me, I can identify where it came from. If it was good or if it was bad, I can point my finger and say, okay, this happened because I did this, good or bad, or this happened because I did that, good or bad. And now my whole mental model around this has changed.
It's deep. I mean, you know, and it gets into the whole concept that we can't predict.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can only connect the dots looking backwards.
That's right. That's right.
You
that's
know,
right.
and one of the things that I was struck by that's necessary to adopt this philosophy of, you know, not expecting reciprocation is it's also the concept of you get exactly what you need at a given time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the story he always tells is about the little kid who wants ice cream, but the parents give him vegetables instead, right? I mean, when they really what they wanted was ice cream.
Right.
But it wasn't what they wanted that was important, it's what they needed at the given time. And what I took from that discussion was, to a large extent, is that the reciprocal function of the greater forces in the universe, or God, or however you want to characterize it, basically that comes back to you at the time and in the measure that you need it.
Yes.
Even if it's not really what you
Yes.
wanted. And
Yes.
that's that gets you, it all ties together, because that gets you to the whole concept of why it's so important to just accept things as they are.
Yes, yes. In that statement, it is what it is, right? You don't need to place any meaning on it, any connotation on it. It just is what it is. And you work with that, as he said, with no expectations. And so now, as we try to make this more tangible for our viewers and listeners, right, instead of ephemeral or philosophical, you know, let's take a look at organizations, right? We talk about being a socially responsible organization, and we see the actions that organizations take. And if the universe is doling out reciprocity, if it's good or bad, then you can really kind of see certain things come back on organizations.
Well, we saw it, this weekend, right, with Silicon Valley Bank.
Yes, they gave out those bonuses, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's it really is fascinating. But to me, the instructive thing is to do things that are consistent with what you value at the time.
Yes.
And not have any expectations of a specific return. Because the truth of it is, we don't even necessarily know what we need. That's right. At a given time, right? I mean, and you go back and you look at your history, right? Like, it's pretty hard for me, some days even now, to come to terms with the fact that, I needed to no longer be a part of Novant Health, and that's what happened.
Right.
It wasn't my choosing at the time.
Right.
But I have this logical belief that was the right thing for me at the time. But I also have a feeling a lot of times that it wasn't.
Right.
And it ties into this idea of, I mean, there's a reciprocal function there, right? Like, I was expecting in return for years of service some type of loyalty, right? In return for performance, some type of loyalty, and that wasn't what happened. But when you put it in the greater context of what will ultimately happen, probably going to all work out fine.
Yeah. We're kind of conditioned that way. We've always been taught if you perform well, you're rewarded by, at the minimum, being able to maintain the position that you have within the organization. And I know I go through that conversation time to time with friends of mine in my previous corporate position from 8 to 13. And I talk about, and I mention it all the time to friends, hey, for 5 years, I never missed a number. We had the best region going. But what happened was somewhere around year 3, there was a shift in who my leader was. And we had philosophical differences. And regardless of what the performance was, our philosophical differences did not allow me to remain there. I had to leave, right? And with quote unquote what they call success, you leave, and at once I'd said, man, this is the perfect position for me. I'm gonna be here for a long time. And then all of a sudden in the 5th year, that's interrupted because I had to make a decision and, walk away what I walked away from. And you have certain feelings about all of that. But then as I look at it now, that's what was supposed to happen. And that's what I needed. That was the catalyst to wake me up, if you will, to get out of a comfort zone, right, of where I was and what I was doing. We were doing well, and so the machine is running well. I can just sit back and just reap the benefits of it all. When in fact, I needed to be doing something different, and I didn't need to be as comfortable as I was, and that's what happened. And as we like to say, it was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, it's so hard to understand those blessings in the moment, right? A lot of times, and it's hung up because we have certain expectations. Mm-hmm. So it's really suspending that, accepting things as they are. It doesn't mean you don't try to do certain things, right? Like we went over that yesterday. Like you still have goal setting for the direction, much more so than for the magnitude, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, the analogy I like in that setting is, the basketball score, right? Like if you set an expectation, well, I want us to score 80 tonight, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense because 80 might not be enough.
That's right.
Or it might be more than you need, right? That's right. So your expectation has to be malleable. Mm-hmm. As the game goes on, you may understand that 80 isn't going to get it done tonight. We're going to need 92 to win this game, or this style of play is different. We can win this finite game with 60. Mm-hmm. And so I love the concept of goals are mostly directional, right? Because the real goal is, in the case of that basketball game, is to outscore the other team.
That's right.
Outplay them so you can outscore them, so you can, in March, survive and advance.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. That's right. It really speaks to understanding and following a process. Whether that process means we got to score 80 tonight or 130 tonight, or maybe the process says all we need is 50 because the other team is not going to get but 49.
They're Virginia.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it's about understanding the process, and it's the journey of becoming better, the journey of achieving the goal. We can't control the outcome, but what we can control is the journey, which is our activity toward achieving the goal. Whether we get to the goal or not is something totally different. But the real learning and the real value comes in the process.
And the enjoyment.
Yes.
The other thing that we went over yesterday, I think it was yesterday, really I think is fascinating to me, and when I look back, I can say yes, that's always been true. In the moment, it's harder to see, but the concept was that your happiness is only based on your engagement with the task. So if I'm undistracted and I'm fully focused on whatever I'm doing, I can be happy. I will be happy. it's when I get distractions and when my focus is removed from that task.
Mm-hmm.
The task itself doesn't have anything to do with whether I'm happy or not,
That's
right? It's just, am I engaged? That is such an instructive formula for life, right? That takes you to a full process focus. That takes you to a focus on who you're working with in a given process and into team function and everything. And that is really powerful too. It also takes you away from certain expectations,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and what we're starting to figure out a lot is that it's the expectations of certain specific things that cause us problems.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. That result, right? Whatever that result is, our expectation is to get to X, and if we don't get to X, then we begin to have all kinds of problems, and all of them are cognitive, right? Around thinking, well, I couldn't achieve the goal, and so you begin to maybe belittle yourself a little bit, or you're judging yourself against someone else, right? And that's never the case. The only person that you have to judge yourself against is you in your past performance, your former performance, right? It's about getting to the process, as you mentioned. Happiness is an independent variable, right? I'm going to be happy regardless. But most of us attach happiness to something else. When I get this, when I achieve this, then I'll be happy. But then something else always comes up. And so guess what? It's the same thing. So we have to be, it's how we've been conditioned, one, in this society to think that way, right? But we have to kind of change how we think about it. I'll tell you what else when you were talking that resonated with me, and that is the concept of multitasking, right? I have so many things going. I'm appearing to be, busy. But if I have so many things going, there are only so many things that I can achieve, because I'm not giving my focus where it needs to be. And I'll go back to someone we both know, and that's Michael Jordan. I remember when he played football, basketball, and baseball. But I also remember when he gave up football and baseball and focused on basketball. And that is, when people ask what's the difference, I said, I can name a whole lot of guys that played multiple sports, but it was only the guys that really focused on what they thought their best sport would be is when they became great. We can even take a look at Allen Iverson, who was an all-state quarterback in Virginia. But he chose basketball, and he focused on basketball, and that's what made him great. Even though he'll say that he was a better football player, and he was a better defensive back than he was a quarterback, and then he was a basketball player. That was his first love. But his focus on basketball is what has him in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, focus is clear, and that process of narrowing it down, because we know from the data that when you get distracted during a task, like the common one people look at is if you get an email interruption when you're in the middle of something, it's going to take you 20 minutes to get back into the flow that you were in before that particular interruption. But I love the fallacy of if-then thinking, right? I mean, we talked about that before, where we delude ourselves into thinking that if we just get one more thing or do one more thing, then we'll be happy or we'll be satisfied or anything. And without a doubt, every time that variable just changes, right? Because we are not in the moment when that happens. And the same thing for reciprocity, right? Like when you think about the concept of reciprocity, that's expecting a certain thing from a certain individual in a reciprocal way is another form of if-then thinking, right?
That's right.
Like you've done this thing, you expect that the person's going to reciprocate. If they reciprocate, then everything's copacetic, we're fine. When that doesn't happen, that's when the mental chatter gets you crazy, right? It becomes, how could this person not do this? Or, you know, I've done all these things and I don't deserve not to get rewarded in the exact way I thought, as if somebody else can magically even know what that is, right?
Right.
And so many of the things, I think that if we're not careful about setting our own expectations, so many of the things are, you know, we may have done something for which we believe we deserve reciprocation. It might not even be consistent with what someone else wanted or needed. It was just our reality.
Right.
We put our reality into their world and expect something to come back to us in a positive way. Probably not a reasonable thing to expect.
When the universe or God or however you want to term it said, that's not what that person needed. You thought they needed that. I didn't give it to them because I know they didn't need it. I'm going to give them exactly what they need. You know, go back to the story of the vegetables and the ice cream, right? I want ice cream, but I need vegetables, right? And so later on in life, you realize, you know what? I did need the vegetables. I didn't need the ice cream. And we have to stop attaching our happiness to something that is external to us, right? Because that's what the real lesson is. Happiness is an internal game, right? You have to decide to be happy, and you continue to continuously and consistently do the things that makes you happy without expecting anyone else to make you happy. Because we always ask, people, am I making you happy? Well, it's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible. I can't make you happy. You make yourself happy. And if you decide to make yourself happy and you work on that, it can happen. So as it relates to the reciprocity, I make you happy, you make me happy. No, you make you happy, I make me happy. And then we travel this journey together, right? It's happy people. And when you're expecting that from someone else, you're trying to place an accountability on somebody when you really can't hold other people accountable. They can only hold themselves accountable.
Right. And a lot of times it happens and the other person doesn't even know they're supposed to do
Yeah,
something.
that's right.
We just made it up. And
That's
so,
right. That's right.
I expected, this to have this kind of return, and it didn't. I mean, gosh, something's wrong with that person.
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
not really. I mean, how are they supposed to know?
That's
Magic.
Right. That's right.
And I think of it a lot of times from the standpoint of, to me, it goes back to biblical, right? I've learned the secret to be content in any and all situations. Philippians 4:12, and that goes to this deep sense of satisfaction with things as they are. And when you can hold that and be in that, then the reciprocal function is that peaceful, easy feeling, if you will, right?
That's right. That's right.
That yes, things are okay. I will move on from here in some way. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what that is, or maybe I know exactly what that is, but things are okay. And that's really how I think we're intended to be and intended to function. But man, it's hard to do. It's easy to talk about, but when you start telling yourself all these different stories, right? Like, I deserve this, or I can't believe that happened because it should have been better, so and so did so and so dirty. You even do it on behalf of other people, right? Like you read in meanings that are only in your head, right? And that sets off this barrage of mental chatter that just takes you into crazy, crazy places.
That mental chatter creates our reality, right? And all of these expectations that we create that other people should do. And it's just a conditioning process. Again, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but it happens, right? You know, I'm going to graduate from high school, I'm going to go to college. But somewhere, there are expectations that I may not have articulated. The assumption is if I go to high school, I go to college. When I get out of college, there's a job, right? There's a better quality of life. You know, the data probably says that. But if it doesn't happen, then what? You know, the expectation of, the assumption of this, because I do this, is going to equate to this. And that may not necessarily be the case. And that also comes back to what Dr. Rao says. It's already written, and maybe it isn't already written.
Right.
Yeah. Which is, you know, paradoxical in and of itself. But there are a lot of great thought-provoking questions to be asked around reciprocity, right? And if we shouldn't expect anything or shouldn't expect anything, it's difficult to even to think that way, because that's not how we've been conditioned to think, not in this society. You know, we were talking in an earlier episode about return on investment, right? Which is an expectation. And it's reciprocity for an investment, right? It's everything is built around some type of reciprocity. And a lot of it might even be subliminal, and we don't even know it.
Yeah, that subliminal piece, more and more I'm coming to the understanding that we're creating that with our mental chatter, and it's mental chatter that we don't recognize, right? Like, there are a lot of times that I'm going along and I can hear that voice in my head, right? And when I can hear it and when I can realize it, I can either let it pass or I can act on it, or you know, I can create a reality out of it, or I can let it pass. The problem is when I don't realize that voice is talking to me, because it's talking to me all the time, right? Like this whole idea of, you know, can we monitor our mental chatter? Well, sure you can, but only a little bit of it, right? And so all these pieces feed together, and in that context of reciprocity, you know, when the mental chatter goes to something like I deserve, or I don't deserve, or I expect, we're really setting ourselves up for disappointment, because it's a form of if then. You know, so again, we're in this whole circular equation. The model takes us there. To me, the fundamental thing that I'm working on, honestly, is just acceptance, right, of things as they are. Doesn't mean I have to leave it like that, right? I can set goals and take actions and engage in processes that move things to a different place. But at every given station, just accepting things exactly as they are, accepting people where they are, is the healthy way to go.
Yeah. Because you set yourself up if you don't, right? Man, I really expected this person. Let's go back to high school. In the yearbook, at the end of the year, most likely to succeed. What are the expectations of the person who is most likely to succeed when you go back to the yearbook? And then when you fast forward 30 years, you say, well, wow, this person didn't achieve what I thought they were going to achieve. And that's because we put a level of expectation on them given where they were in their life at that time. We didn't know what was going to happen over the next 30 years. We thought we could predict what may happen, but when they don't fit the expectations that we've created in our head around that mental chatter, say, wow, I'm really disappointed. Or wow, I'm really surprised. Or wow. It's just accept them where they are, because what we forecasted on them may not have been what they saw for themselves. We both have a friend that I highly intelligent being, right? But there was a career that we thought this person should go into, but never did. And that's because we saw something that they didn't see for themselves. And we have to accept that. No amount of cajoling or pushing or influencing was ever going to get that person to do what we thought they should do. And that's because they didn't see that for themselves. And we have to be mindful, as like I told a friend of mine about his son. He was talking about, man, I want my son to do this, and I want my son to do this, and I want my son to do that. And I said, well, are those his dreams? Because you can't live his dreams. He has to live his dreams. And if they're not his dreams, and he doesn't do what you want him, you can't be disappointed, because he has to live his life, and he has to live his dreams. And his son has done well, but he's taken a different path in life than his father. And in so doing, he's done well, and his father has had to accept where he is, because he has done well, but it wasn't what his father necessarily wanted him to do.
So hard when it's your kids or your immediate family, spouse, that to let that go.
Yes.
I always say they have to find their own way.
That's right.
My wife and I talk about that all the time. Ultimately, they have to find their own way. And isn't it pretty? It's really egocentric of us to think that we, have the ability to forecast what somebody else who's totally different than us should do or could do or will do.
I hear it all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I had a friend of mine tell me from high school, I never thought I would call you Dr. Jackson. I said, well, you never really knew me. That's why. You never knew what drove me, what my fire was, right? It's like I tell my daughter from time to time. I said, you know what? Girl, I sure wish I could give you my fire. I said, you got that chemistry degree. I said, the bathtub would never look the same. I said, I have all kind of chemicals in there making all kinds of stuff. But guess what? I have to accept that her fire is her fire. And my fire is my fire. And so I can't give you my fire, And then what ultimately happens is there's a fire that's consistent. It might be in a different area, but then you can recognize, that's where their fire was. That's what they were really passionate about. For me, with a business mind, I'm thinking, I understand how the elements come together. I'm going to pour everything in the bathtub. I'm going to create some kind of product, right? And sell it, and it's going to be successful. But that's not what her fire is. It's different than my fire.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. Put it in the context of humanity. You can make a pretty true reality that everybody has fire. It's just a matter of can they find it? And some of that is, are others of us willing to let them find it? Right? Like, are we willing to suspend our judgments, to be careful what we say in terms of expectation setting or labeling, as we've talked about in other episodes, in a way that enables those folks to reach that level of fire about whatever it is, And when you go back through history, you see these people who have done incredible, great things, right? And it's pretty hard to create a pattern out of what it takes, right? Because people from all different backgrounds have done fabulous things that made the world a better place. The only real common denominator is that they did those things, whatever they are, right? I mean, because you can't make a recipe for them. It takes this background to achieve this, or that. It just doesn't work that way.
No. If there is another commonality, it is what we talked about, right? And that is a single focus, right? A single focus on what they were doing, not all the multitasking, right? It's like, we like to say, take the blinders off the horse. But most of the people that we saw that have been very successful, they had some blinders on, right? They were focused forward. Not that their focus didn't deviate at some point in time, but they came back. Something always brought them back to it, right? And that was whatever that it was probably a focus and a fire that kept them where they were. Let me eliminate all these distractions so that I can singularly focus on this one particular thing that made me, or that I enjoy doing. They're not doing it to be great. They enjoy doing it and end up being great, right? No expectation.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the process of surgical training, right? Like basically you go into a tunnel. I went into a tunnel for 11 years, basically. Medical school, residency training, fellowship. And the cautionary tale there is be careful what you expect back from it, right? And as you finish, and all of a sudden, you get to the end of that process, and I vividly remember the moment that the realization hit me, because I was like, I did all that to get to here. This is the destination, and it wasn't. Right, like it was always about the process, and it was still about the process at that point when I had finished that part of the journey. And meeting that realization was a really important time to understand that this has always been about the journey, and you need to enjoy it. And the interesting thing, when I looked back, there were great times all along the way of that process, and it was because of intense focus, right? Like it was all about, sometimes in 100 plus 130 hour weeks, it was about surviving, right? But you're in the middle of this work with this group of other people who are also working really hard. So you're fully engaged, and it's like we talked about a little bit earlier in this hour. That focus on that process gives you satisfaction. You don't need anything else. That's the core characteristic that we all have, is that when we're in the moment, whatever the moment is, it's perfect.
Yep, it's
the
magical.
world is right.
That's right. That's right. That's right. You call it the flow, right? You get it.
Yeah.
Man, I'm in the flow. It's like a friend of mine. He says, "Man, did you hear what you said?" I said, "No, I didn't." I said, "I must have been in the flow." So I'm giving you permission to record me the next time we have a conversation, because it's right down it's in your wheelhouse, right? As they say, that focus. And I guess that comes from a point of the universe knowing what it is that you need versus what you want, right? And that whole piece of reciprocity, right? That goes to the question that Einstein asked, is the universe friendly? And if the universe is always giving you what you need versus what you want, yes, it is. From the universe is always it's not conspiring against you. It's just a matter of you understanding and knowing I have to be a being without any expectations.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've always coached people, and particularly doctors, on, that feel like, there's a tendency when things don't go your way to think the cards are stacked against you, right? The system's against me, or the, so-and-so's out to get me. I've honestly never found that to be the case. And so I always coach people to understand that it's not a system stacked against you. It's neither for you nor against you. It's just that you're trying to do this thing. Other people are trying to do these other things. And sometimes those aren't consistent. And it's going to go one way or the other. And the next level of that is kind of what we're talking about in our class, is that when it's not going my way, there's some model, some mental model that I've created that's inconsistent with the universal energy that's carrying things in a different direction than that. So it's really incumbent upon me at that point in time to change my model.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise I'm just going to beat my head up against the wall trying to do something that is not going to happen at that particular point in time.
We have to create that alternate reality, right? And live into it, and then look for the evidence, right? So we can make that shift, and that the alternate reality is a new model, right? I had some aha moments around that as well, and the use of language, the use of a specific type of language to create that model. Because we have to be aware of the stories that we tell ourselves, because that mental chatter creates our reality, right? And as I begin to do that, then I begin to see more of the friendliness of the universe. And from a reciprocity perspective, it's like, I did this, and wow, this was given back to me. I didn't expect it, but it was given back to me. And guess what? It's consistent with where I am on my journey in life.
Fascinating thing to me around this whole mental chatter goes to the concept of the inadequacy of our language. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things I've realized over the last couple of months of this class is that even though I got a pretty big vocabulary, it is nowhere near what's needed to describe the feelings and thoughts that I'm carrying around in my mental chatter. So a lot of times my mental chatter is in a language of feelings or thought, mm-hmm. not words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And figuring out how to get in tune with that, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's not really words that make you feel like the planet is working against you, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. It's a feeling that you have. Right. You can't even, because evidence of that is try to explain that shit to somebody.
Right. Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. I mean, that's right. And you can't.
Right. You can't. And when we can guard against the mental chatter that's not just words, that mm-hmm. is feelings that mm-hmm. take us to words that are simpler than what can really describe the feeling, mm-hmm. that's when we get in trouble. And mm-hmm. that's when we put together stories of what things are mm-hmm. that, take us into bad places.
Yeah. We have to be mindful of that. I remember taking a class when I was in Columbus, Ohio, and in this course, there were about 400 people in the room that for this Saturday and Sunday, and people were just kind of telling their story, going to the microphone in front of everybody and telling their story. And there was one gentleman who got up and he talked about the passing of his mother. And he didn't really think about, he didn't think that his father loved him. And the reason he began to tell himself the story that his father didn't love him, when his mother passed, his father made him sleep on the porch outside in Texas. And he saw that as an act of his father not loving him. And so he began to tell him this story, tell himself this story. And then later on in life, as he moved on, he got his own place. Of course, those stories began to just compound. His father just dealt with, that's how he grieved, right? And, this guy didn't go to his father's funeral because he didn't think that his father loved him. When in fact, his father did love him. He just didn't know how to show it, right? It's like some kids today who parents can afford to buy them some Jordans. And so they may buy them, I don't know, Converse or Adidas. And they begin to build a story up that my mom or dad doesn't love me because they didn't buy me the Jordans. And then that story goes, and the stories begin to compound and compound and compound, and that's all that mental chatter that's going on around, which is not real, but people begin to think those kinds of things, right? And later on in life, if they have the opportunity to unpack, they find out that the story I was telling myself the entire time was untrue. It just wasn't true, right? And it happens to all of us all of the time, right? We just have to be mindful enough. That's why I like what Dr. Rao says. We have to be aware, because I call awareness a leading indicator, meaning that when we're aware of it, it's up front versus clarity, because clarity means that there's some kind of outcome, right? And the outcome may not ever happen, and that's why we say we don't worry about what the outcome, we worry about the process. And awareness makes me aware up front. And during the entire journey, I'm aware of what I have to do, what I have to achieve as far as the process is concerned. And I'm aware of it even though I may not get to what the outcome is, or the outcome I would love to be able to generate. And I used to say, get to the desired outcome, right? But I can't control that. I can just control my awareness around the process.
Leap of faith. It's the leap of faith concept, that by really fully engaging in the process that you get to an outcome that is the right outcome, right, if you will. But, it's amazing how often we end up actually in a better place than what the goal was. Maybe it's a higher performance in exactly what the goal is, or maybe it's a few degrees different than the goal because we realized along the way that we needed to course adjust. But this concept of mental chatter and the story we tell ourselves, it reminds me of a quote that's attributed to Lincoln, who said, I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened, right? Because it really underscores that notion that, we're ruminating in our brains about potential outcomes. And to the extent that we continue that self-dialogue, we're making that happen. We're making it seem like that's happening, even if it is not happening. And commonly, because we talk things into existence, it moves in the direction of what we fear. And it's almost meditative. It is meditative to be able to just let those thoughts pass like clouds in the sky. And that's what takes you into the mindfulness space, and whatever you're doing is when something crops up that is threatening to distract you, to just let that go and remain focused. And it's interesting, we're better at it and worse at it depending on the situation. One of the things that I miss about surgery is that in that environment, it was really easy to be focused. The whole system is set up for the surgeon to be focused on the task at hand, on what's in front. You don't have to look for anything. You can just ask for whatever tool you need. It's given to you, and you just move on. That's really an enjoyable experience. In my experience, there's almost no stress in surgery on the surgeon, right? All the stress is on the rest of the folks to try to meet whatever that expectation is. The system is geared toward meet the expectation of the operator. And as long as that holds, then it allows the right focus, and things just flow. It allows you to be in that flow state such a huge percentage of the time.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because there's not many things in life that allows you to be in that flow, consistently, right? Because we always talk about it from a sports, from a sports perspective. Oh man, this guy, he had 70 points last night. He was in the flow, but that's a rarity, right? That's definitely out of the norm. But when you talk about a system that allows that on a regular basis, that is something special for that to be the case. And the question then becomes, how do we get into the flow, right? To understand what we're talking about around reciprocity, right? Knowing and not feeling guilty because, being an emotional being, someone does something good for me, I feel like I have to do something good for them. Not doing something good for them, but not feeling guilty about it, right? Because being human, we have those kinds of thoughts and those kinds of emotions. And then for others to not try to make you feel guilty because you didn't do for them as they thought you should do, given what they may have done for you. It's just interesting. It provokes a lot of thought, calls for a lot of critical thinking. And I hate to put the label of right or wrong. We're not saying anything of right or wrong because Dr. Rao will say he used a model that works for you, right? But it takes a lot of in-depth thought.
Lifelong process.
Yep.
And it's a whole nother topic that, could be an episode of itself, is the whole guilt and blame thing is a really dangerous place to be. We beat ourselves up for things that our former self did, and we didn't necessarily know any better at that time, or sometimes we did, but that's a whole nother space of exploration. But I'm really struck by this whole concept of reciprocity will happen. That was the biggest takeaway I had, is that reciprocity will happen. It may not look like what you think it ought to or what you think it could, but it's just a fundamental feature that allows people to get what they need when they need it.
Yeah. And then makes you also think about karma, right? Yeah.
A whole nother, yeah.
Because you might get what you need, but it may not necessarily be what you thought you needed, right? Because it's reciprocity, and I guess it could be combined with karma. And depending on what you did or didn't do, it will come to you in a particular way that could be good, and it might not necessarily be good, right?
And I love the way, another Dr. Raoism is, maybe good, maybe bad. We shall see.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
We can't know in the moment.
That's right.
We get spun into different emotional spaces that we label as good or bad, and as soon as we introduce that duality to it, we get stuck again.
That's another piece. That's a whole nother type. Duality, right? I think I asked yesterday something about when I think of being, I think of stillness, right? To be able to absorb and get all that I need. But if the stillness becomes motion, have I created duality with that motion, right? Again, just thought provoking. And I always I also say karma never misses. And I guess I can say the same thing about reciprocity. Reciprocity never misses.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We could go on all day about this and not get any answers because there aren't any.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
Really appreciate our listeners hanging with us on this episode. It's pretty theoretical at times, but we tried to give some pragmatic examples. If you want to catch up with us, unlikelyintersection.com, or our YouTube channel, Unlikely Intersections, or Facebook page, Unlikely Intersections. I'm at docphilipbrown.com or Doc Philip Brown on LinkedIn. And Terry?
You can find me at LinkedIn, Terry Jackson, PhD. You can also find me on Facebook. It's been an interesting conversation to have, as Doc said, a lot of theory, but we tried to interject a couple of examples to give you something hard to take a look at and think about.
We'll see you at the next intersection.